Good morning. I am a professor at the Faculty of Sciences of University of Lisbon, teaching sustainable mobility at the master and PhD levels. So this lecture is about smart and sustainable mobility adaptation amid coronavirus pandemic. If we think about sustainable mobility, we think about transportation of goods and people that satisfy the needs. It's compatible with the health of human beings and ecosystems, reduce fossil fuel usage, reuse and recycle its materials, produce low noise, has low land use, low impacts. It's affordable, efficient, endorses model choice, and supports a dynamic economy and local development. Now, if we move on to what is smart mobility, it is sustainable mobility, but fully integrated with a communication platform and a digital platform behind it, allowing it to be shared with fully seamless communication. And so this smart mobility concept boosts even further efficiency, flexibility, and allows people transportation and goods transportation being shared, and so it boosts even further the sustainability. Now, if we look to the business as usual in commuting, we observe that usually this is the case of United States, but if we look here, the orange slice, it's always higher than the other color slices, meaning private car, it's still a major. This is back in 2007, this is in August 2018, and we see here that the private car in US, it's still the main commuting transportation system, and here in Lisbon, Portugal, it's the same. So this is back in 2017, and we observe that the majority of trips of commuting is made by the private car. And not the public transportation sector, even though we have like roughly 20% of our trips made by walking or biking. Nevertheless, the private car is always the higher consumer of energy here and pollutant emitter. So in the case of the most sustainable transportation systems, that is walking or biking or scooting if you want, these systems have subject the people to outdoor air quality environment, breathable environment. And if we look here to the other options that consume less energy in terms of megajoule per passenger kilometer, which is the bus and the metro, then we see they have indoor breathable environment. So these people here have outdoor air quality issues, and these guys here have outdoor and indoor air quality issues. If we look to car sharing, I put here as also a sustainable transportation system, because with less resources, less material, we satisfy the need of more people. Now, the business as usual in the goods transportation, then, for example, for a good made in Bangladesh, then we observe several trips before it is being shipped to the country. In this case, it's Portugal, Lisbon, and there are three main options here for the long distance transportation. So the airplane transportation, it is the fastest one, then the road transportation, the second fastest one, and finally the shipping through bunker that is the slowest delivery option. Nevertheless, the problem here, besides the great distances made by the package, the problem is when arriving to the city, in this case Lisbon, what it happens. In this, what it happens, it's the last mile delivery, and why it is a concern, the last mile delivery, is because people want more and more faster, free delivery, and with the boost of online purchasing, then we can see the boost in the traffic related to the last mile delivery, last mile home delivery. And this can be a burden to congestion and can be a burden if these transportation systems are doing internal combustion of gasoline and diesel, then they are harming and degrading air quality, outdoor breathable environment. So this is the business as usual for people transportation and for goods transportation. Now, air quality degradation, how do we monitor air quality degradation? There are two kinds of monitoring here. We can monitoring in a top-down approach by using satellites that are in our exosphere and are measuring. This is the latest Sentinel-5P satellite that has a unit here, the tropomi, that measures troposphere, this level here, troposphere columns in terms of concentration of molecules per square meter of the slice of the column. And this is a kind of giving us a sense if this column here in the troposphere is higher, with higher concentration of molecules or less concentration of molecules, for example, of NOx and ozone. Now, other approach, it's the bottom-up approach, bottom-up, that is measuring the troposphere air quality at our breathing level through an air quality network of sensors, air quality monitoring stations like this one here in the picture that are in the surface of the Earth. And here is the spread of this air quality network to measure this troposphere breathable environment, outdoor breathable environment. Now, the problem here in our business as usual model is that it occurred a disruption, and this disruption shook our business as usual model. And this is the coronavirus, which started in December in China back in 2019. So China alerted here in December that something was wrong. Then some markets in Wuhan were shut down. It was identified the coronavirus as of January. And the first death in China is reported, of course, in January. And then the pull out of the virus to other countries besides other Chinese cities. And so Wuhan was fully locked down as of January. And then it started spreading. And if we see here the spreading timeline, we see here as of January, 20 January, we have like 4 countries with the virus. Then February, we had 28 countries. And then in March, the World Health Organization declares the outbreak of the new coronavirus as a pandemic, and it spread throughout all the countries. And in April, in all the 195 countries, we had this COVID-19 pandemic. And so it was a disruption in our business as usual. So lockdowns, full lockdowns or partial lockdowns were observed. Some industry closes, some commerce also closes, like restaurants, coffees, etc. And so what we observe here in the epicenter of the coronavirus was that in terms of transportation, it was shut down. So we can observe here that no road traffic or little road traffic appears here in this situation. And so public transportation really closes, and also private car was not allowed. So people were fully locked down for a time and then alleviated. In other Chinese cities like Shenzhen, for example, to control the spread of the virus, then the public transportation adopted severe measures in terms of reducing its occupancy level. So 50% of its capacity was allowed for passengers to allow social distancing, high levels of hygiene at the end of each service to provide safe transportation to the passengers that need to use the public transportation. Nevertheless, the driver also uses mask and has to be fully protected from the other passengers. So this is a response to this disruption. So social distancing is the key here in the public transportation, and so the green one, the available seats, dramatically reduces. And this can be a huge economic issue here in the public transportation. This here, to separate the zone of the driver from the remain of the passengers, some cities adopted like a plastic curtain to separate completely the driver, to ensure that the driver is safe. In Beijing, China, an interesting IoT application in rush hour. So people have to book its seat in the public transportation by an application, and then that generates a QR code, and then people pass the QR code to assess its booked spot here in the public transportation. So these IoT applications are boosting throughout China and all over the world. For example, the ride-hailing services also had a severe impact due to this coronavirus disruption, and also adopted in some cases in China this plastic curtain, to separate the driver from the passengers. And so what we observe, it's throughout the world, lockdowns or partial lockdowns, a boost in telework, if that is possible, of course, and a boost in online shopping of groceries and small parcels like books, for example. And so the travel demand is falling on one side, on the side of commuting, it's decreasing, but on the other side, we can see that the last mile delivery can be increasing a lot. And so cities throughout the world had to adjust to the new reality following the impact of COVID-19. And the adjustment in China was, for example, walk more, bike more, to avoid public transportation, for example, in the cases of partial lockdown, or in the case of releasing measures of lockdown. For example, in New York, we also observe a shift to cycling more. So this application here, the city bike, that is the application of the shared bike system in New York, then people prefer to avoid indoor-related transport, public transportation system, bus, metro, the social distancing issue, the indoor breathable environment, and people are preferring to move with a bike. and this is the network in New York. So lots of bikes, lots of stations, and we observe this trend all over the world. So other cities like Paris, for example, that was also French country, French citizens were also really struck by this pandemic. So they created pop-up bike lanes, stealing road from the private car. That is a major issue here in sustainable mobility. And they are creating additional 650 kilometers of post-lockdown cycling. So this is a good way try to shift from private car to more sustainable transportation modes. This example here, Italy, a major European country that was also affected by the pandemic. Rome and Milan builds bike lanes to keep cyclists away from mass transit. So here are again stealing roads from the private car and building more than 35 kilometers of new lanes, for example, in Milan. So this is again an example of trying to shift to more sustainable ways. But why? Because of social distancing and avoid public transportation, people concentration. Another example in Germany, so again they widened the cycle lanes, stealing again from the private cars to allow for the social distancing issue here in Germany. Another example, now not in Europe but in America, so we have here Colombia, Bogota, expands bike lanes to curb coronavirus spread. Why? And this, we are talking about 76 kilometers of temporary bike lanes. Why? Because they do have a very crowded bus rapid transit system, public transportation system, and so to move away people, social distancing, they are creating all these additional temporary cycle lanes to try to keep, to contain the virus. So what we are observing is that this disruption here, this bowling ball, this disruption from our business as usual has been boosting. What we have been observing is that it has been boosting soft modes, the so-called active modes, so walking and biking. So this is an opportunity, this disruption, it's an opportunity also to transform the mindset of people to telework, more telework, and shifting to more sustainable transportation modes. Now, what we can see also in terms of IoT, it's that people, because of this disruption, have been more digital friendly, meaning we are basing our lifestyle in a more digital based platform. Not only because we do much of our telework meetings online, some classes are online, and so applications demanding for food, demanding for books online, and so this is an opportunity for the digital commerce here. And also the real-time information systems in terms of transportation are popping up. So this including occupancy levels, for example, saying that a lane is crowded or not, to avoid people concentration and the spread of the virus. For example, applications to inform about road closures or lane closures with filters for cyclists. For example, in some countries, these applications say that a road is okay for transport in the morning, for example, and in the afternoon is dedicated to cyclists, for example. And this is through a real time information system through an application, IoT application. So footway widening or decluttering, again with an application information. Autonomous freight, we saw this boosts. For example, we have here some examples by Navia. I will show this. And for example, drones delivering packages are also boosting. So there's new solutions for the last mile delivery. Also real-time dashboards and data sharing. This is really, so including smartphones and etc. So this is smart mobility. This is connecting things through communication systems, through sharing information. So this also boosts the big data platforms here. So this is an example of the Navia situation here that I talked about. So in this case, this is a complete autonomous electric shuttle that transports people. For example, has been transporting people in US, in the Michigan City, University of Michigan, also transportation students here. And now, in terms of this disruption that is the COVID-19, then we observe the Navia shuttles transporting COVID-19 tests. So this is an example of like a package transportation, fully autonomous. Also, we observe a growth especially in US, of these robots delivering small parcels. For example, here the FedEx robot. And this is an opportunity here to develop more this kind of last mile transportation. And this avoids, for example, the congestion and air quality degradation issues. So here is the drone that I talked about, delivering a small parcel. And so, just to give a background. So we have here, before the COVID-19, we had a World Economic Forum report about online purchasing. And so they concluded that urban delivery is expected to add 11 minutes to daily commute. It was before the COVID-19, and increase carbon emissions by 30% until 2030. This without effective intervention. So it was the business as usual. Now with COVID-19, if we pass to the same levels of commuting, this will even further increase because people are demanding more online because of the pandemic. And also the report analyzes 24 interventions, including droids, electric cars, and parcel lockers that can help decrease this boost in CO2 emissions and congestion and air quality degradation. So this report is important, so we can take this opportunity here of this disruption and try to avoid and minimize and put into practice these interventions that are mentioned here in the report. So in terms of electric cars purchase for commuting, then we see the top 3 countries that usually in the business as usual scenario, we had like China, United States, Norway in Europe, this Norway market here huge, that purchase plug-in electric cars. So it was in 2018, referring to the sales of the cars. Now it was before the pandemic. Now the estimation before the pandemic was this green line here, that the electric car manufacturers were expecting an increase in the sales for 2021. But because of the disruption of COVID-19, then they are now expecting a decrease from this business as usual by 34% drop in electric car sales. So some other studies refer to a plunge of 40% of the new sales. So between 30 and 40%. Now, in terms of electric plug-in electric buses, again, China is the leader in the market because 17% of the buses circulating in China are fully electric. But it was before the COVID-19. It was a great deal of investment here in the electric buses. And we also saw that in terms of Europe, we have here some countries, Italy is here, Portugal is here, and Germany, United Kingdom, they also purchase another kind, so not fully electric, with a little bit of combustion of gasoline or diesel. But it was the market, but it is projected to be slowing down. Why? Because the investment in electric bus fleets, it's expensive, and now we are facing also an economic crisis due to COVID-19. Now, in terms of air quality impact, lots of IoT applications also for this air quality visualization all over the world. And the business as usual in China, for example, is that we observe that the transportation system and the industry, so this blue and orange here, has been pretty much in the same shares of, for example, NOx emissions. And we observe that all over the years, they together combined are more than 50% of the NOx emissions. And so this is an issue here in the air quality department. Now, it was in China. Now in Europe, we can see here the road transportation sector, and the energy production and distribution, and the industrial process, and the energy use in industry. So we can see that these slices also together are more than 50% of the share, again, in the NOx emissions. Italy, it's not different. So we can see here the pink here back in 2005 and 2016. So this is business as usual, road transportation contribution, and industry contribution. We can see combustion in industry, the purple one here. And so together, again, they are like 50% or more of NOx emissions. Of course, we can see the picture for particle, PM2.5. This means particles with less than 2.5 micrometers diameter. And we can see here the pink one and the purple one. So in this case, it's a little bit lots of less impact in terms of particles. Nevertheless, the thing here is that if we eliminate the pink, and of course, if we eliminate the pink and we eliminate some purple due to partial lockdowns or lockdowns, we can observe a decrease in NOx emissions, but not a complete shutdown, a complete zero to NOx emissions. And the same here in Europe. So if I shut down this, I reduce here, I reduce the purple and orange, but nevertheless, I reduce. I don't eliminate. And even if I eliminate, I still have the other sectors. And so the emissions are not going to be zero. If we see here, this is the full line is full lockdown, the dot line is partial lockdown. And this is in several countries, and this is the average world. I'm sorry, this is like, it's not lockdown and partial lockdown. This is like the evolution, the trend in the vehicle miles traveled. So we can see here by the weeks after the lockdown, we can see here China with a huge drop in the vehicle miles traveled, but not to zero. So the share corresponding to the transportation, to the road transportation contribution to NOx emissions, it's not going to zero. In Europe, then we have also a cut here. United States, a cut. India, a cut. So, but not to zero. Some traffic still traveling around. And so, if we observe this from the point of view of the air quality degradation indicator, then, and using the top-down observation, that is with satellites, in this case it was from our satellite, so older than the Sentinel 5P satellite, and this OMI here, it's the monitoring of tropospheric NOx, for example, and we can see here in 2019, these were the NO2 concentration in terms of number of molecules per square meter in the January, February timeline, and this is with COVID. And so we definitely observe from the same period a difference in concentration of NOx gas emissions. So this is caused by alleviating, by the lockdown, of course, don't having road transportation, shutting down some facilities. But it's not zero. The important message here, it's not zero. It's in the blue, but not zero. So if we look to other types of emissions that are derived from combustion also of fossil fuels, that are the CO2 emissions, then we can see the business as usual here in the transport slice and the industry slice, almost the same, and almost 40% together, 40% of the impact in terms of CO2 emissions. So this, it was business as usual. If I lock down, if I shut down, alleviate some traffic, if I shut down some, alleviate some traffic, shut down some industries, what I can see is that I have a reduction, and perhaps I will reduce also here the electricity consumption, but it's not going to be zero. So I don't have a stiff reduction to zero in also in CO2 emissions, like in air quality degradation emissions. And for example, here in this graph, we can see that the several crises here, for example, the Spanish flu, energy crisis, recession, Second World War, and we can see here the estimated impacts of this COVID-19 pandemic. We can see, and we can expect like a 6% top drop in CO2 emissions. So it's not going to be fully to zero, of course. Now, according to this Global Energy Review 2020, a flagship report, it was released in April 2020. We can see here that, again, the information on the crisis, the several disruptions here in our business as usual, and then we have here COVID. And we can see here that the gigatons avoided of CO2 emissions here, the drop, it's like, if we can see here, 2.5 gigatons. And this is consistent with this information here, the percentage change. So 2 gigatons, it's an expectation and a reality here in the CO2 emissions. So This is pretty huge, and it must be, we must think this as an opportunity to learn why the emissions are reducing, and to learn and try to keep up this pace even after the COVID-19. So this here, it's the reduction in CO2 emissions if we have limited restrictions, so like 15%, partial lockdown and full lockdown. So 30% decrease in those weeks of lockdown is a reality. Now, in terms of electricity consumption, we also observe in Europe that the energy demand dropped 10% in an average way, of course, in Europe. The coal generation dropped like 30%, and so because of that, the CO2 intensity in grams per kilowatt hour also decreased like 20%, and the share of renewable generation increased. So also we must learn from this. Now it is partial lockdown here in this dashed line, and the full line is full lockdown. And so what is this graph meaning? It means the reduction in terms of electricity demand. And so, for example, if we look here in China, there were like 15% reduction in electricity demand, and then a recover, but not fully recovered yet to the level that was before the COVID-19. Of course, this has to do with some industries shutting down or not. India here also a decrease, topping here at 22% decrease in electricity demand. Italy, like almost 27% decrease in electricity demand. And so this, of course, curbed the CO2 emissions because the grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour were less due to the coal generation reduction. Now, I would like to zoom in the specific country, not Italy, in this case, my country, Portugal. So I will zoom in and observe the timeline of COVID and impacts in terms of transportation. So in terms of our timeline, it was a little bit different. So we have like pre-warnings. University closes on 10 March. So before the the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. And then we had like lockdown, partial lockdown with telework as of 19 March. And then we had like a relieved first phase on 3 May. And now we are in the third phase of deconfinement. So what can we observe from this timeline? I will talk about this bike sharing, new lanes, energy consumption, public transportation, and air quality. If we look to our Lisbon biking uses in commuting, we have some echo counters here, and I will zoom in one of the echo counters that is a sensor that counts bike passing through the sensor. So I will go back to the business as usual and then see what happened after the disruption here of COVID-19. So we have like this use of bikes in 2017, and then we had like a launch of our sharing bike system in June 2017, but with little number of bikes and only one area in the first trial, so no increase here in the bike use. We observed no increase. Then when we put more stations in, we covered more areas, more urban areas, then we observe an increase in the use of bikes. And here it's a sensor malfunction, but nevertheless we can see here the business as usual, and then almost like 1,000 bikes a day, and then we can see here the disruption. Now I will zoom in the disruption, and the disruption, so this is the business as usual, and the spikes here are the weekdays, so around 1,000 bikes in the weekdays. Now with the bike sharing functioning in a good shape, and then we have here the weekends, like with half the levels of the bikes. This is the business as usual. Now, warnings, pre-warnings, university shuts down, lockdown. And we observe here a huge decrease. And then in the lockdown, in the partial lockdown, because here in Portugal, we didn't have like a full lockdown. Then we have here the weekends in the lockdown, and people increasing its bike use in the weekends. Now, opposing to this business as usual. And the weekdays dropped a lot. So to like 100 bikes, from 1,000 to 100 bikes on the weekdays. And now in the post-lockdown, then some recovering of the weekdays and now the weekends, but we are not still fully recovered, and we didn't observe here like we did in other countries, like pop-up bike lanes. That was not true. So people usually take the traffic lanes because in the lockdown it was really less traffic here in the city. Nevertheless, and here is the confirmation. This is the business as usual. Weekend, roughly 700 on average bikes, and here on average like 1,100 bikes. So this is our business as usual. And here after the COVID, in the weekends, we still observe many bikes, and so we can see that the average is similar, so a little bit less, 14% bikes in the weekends, because people are also afraid. Nevertheless, we have here a maximum weekend use, similar to the average commuting days, business as usual days. And then we observe here the weekends really affected by teleworking, for example. And the drop in the weekend was like 50%. And so, as I was saying, in Portugal here, in specific case of Lisbon, we expect a growth in our bike lanes, but this was also projected before the COVID-19. So here in Lisbon, we didn't notice that shift to conquer space from the private car lanes to the bike lanes, like we see in Italy, Germany, France, and even in Colombia, etc. So in terms of our energy consumption and comparing the 3 last years, the average of the 3 last years to this partial lockdown April month, we can see a drop in 14% in diesel consumption due to less commuting traffic, of course, due to telework. And in terms of gasoline, there's a 60% drop here in the gasoline consumption. This is in the month of April. That is our month of lockdown. So because of this, we expect a reduction in CO2 emissions of this amount of tons. So it's a huge impact here. only because we consume less gasoline and diesel, less fossil fuels. So if we zoom in Portugal in terms of electricity consumption, this is business as usual here. So the last 2 years and then 2020, so January, we consume high levels of electricity. So this is in gigawatt hour. In February, we also consume more or less the same than the average of the previous 2 years. But in March, we observe a reduction, and in April, our full month of lockdown, a stiff reduction here of nearly 20% less electricity consumption. In terms of our electric car sales, we also observe in the same period of April a drop in 47% of electric car sales. So this is bad for the electric car market, of course, but we expect that people buy less cars and try to mindset them to use more soft or active modes. So in terms of our deconfinement plan, in terms of public transportation, our occupancy was not reduced to 50% like in China, but two-thirds, so less 1/3 of the people, to assure social distancing. Also, the mask is mandatory, and we have more costs here in the public transportation because we do have more hygiene and cleaning, as we can see here in these pictures at the end of the bus and subway services. We have a high level of disinfection, and also people wearing masks, and the driver fully protected with also gloves, fully protected from other passengers. And this is an opportunity here also. If we think on autonomous transportation, if we avoid the driver, this is in terms of a possibility to contaminate less one people. Of course, this will impact economy in terms of less job here opportunity. So this is a trade-off. Now, air quality. What happens in Portugal? And now I will look to the recent Copernicus Sentinel-5P using the Tropomi module, and to see, I will look to nitrogen dioxide indicator. And we can see here Portugal. This is before the COVID, and we can see here Lisbon with lots of activity, and Oporto also with lots of activity. So we can see here by the concentration of molecules by square meter. Now, in the lockdown, and this is a timeline, we can see here no reds or yellows, and now we can see blues. Then dark blue, dark blue, dark blue. This is in March. This is in from 14 March to 18 March. So these days were blue. It's interesting to note that the pollutants are now seem to be only in maritime transportation here. So this could be indicators of maritime transportation due to goods transportation. And so we can see here, and of course the less traffic here, traffic is also on the troposphere, the airplanes traffic, and we can see here some traffic and then some less traffic, aviation traffic. So this is quite interesting, and we should learn from this. We have also other bottom-up type of air quality sensing, and in this case we have Earth's surface air quality monitoring network that is here in Portugal, and we can see the impact of the lockdown. It was in Portugal like less 50% of NOx and PM 2.5 emissions. This is a projection based on data from previous years and corrected to weather climate variables. So this is a report based on the scientific papers here, and it is quite interesting. For example, in Europe, average Europe, the reduction is lesser. And also if we see here Italy, it's like 40% for NOx and pretty much less for particles. Now, other thing that is interesting to look at, it's why measuring air quality, because air quality degradation is connected, is linked also with deaths. And so if we look to the deaths, avoided due to the reduction in pollutants concentration, then we can see these are several countries. And I will focus on Portugal, but here we can get an overall picture. So these are the predicted deaths. This is average. This is the error bar here. And for example, we can see here in Italy that the predicted deaths were only like, I don't know, less than 10%, less than 5% of the COVID-19 deaths here. Of course, because the COVID-19 really struck here Italy and France, for example, in Spain. And so the percentage of deaths avoided by air quality is not that representative. But if we look to Portugal, for example, it's of the same order, the deaths from COVID, it's of the same order than the deaths projected and deaths avoided due to air quality improvement. And also some countries here even have higher deaths because of air quality, avoided because of air quality, than by COVID. This is something that we should think about. So air quality here in these countries, for example, it's killing more people than COVID. Now, if I zoom out Portugal and see what is happening, it's definitely, we see a high an increase in costs in public transportation due to hygiene, and then loss of revenue because also there are lesser people inside the public transportation because of don't have trust levels, prefer outdoor breathable environment, or because there are restrictions. For example, in China, they 50% of the bus it's occupied. In Portugal, 2/3 of the bus is occupied. So this loss of revenue, it's a major bad thing here from the sustainable mobility point of view. There are opportunities, of course. We can, in these cases, pandemic cases, we must also look to the good sides of it, and we observe here an opportunity of autonomous bus, autonomous transportation, autonomous last mile delivery, more digitalization of society, mindset changing of society to more sustainable, smart mobility. It's an opportunity. And so if I do this in like a SWOT analysis, I can see the major strength. This is to the transportation system of goods and people. The major strength from this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic, it's disruptive nature. It disrupts our business as usual, and that's a strength. Now, the weaknesses is like social distancing, avoiding the virus spread. It's harming the public bus transportation. On the other hand, it's boosting other soft modes like walking and biking. So subway, bus, ride-hailing, car sharing are menaced by this disruption. Now, the opportunities, we must look to these opportunities here. And so if we think on the Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations, this is an opportunity for we to commit to these goals and rebuild our future. Redesign mindset, boost soft modes, boost IoT applications, so boost smart mobility, and also look to the last mile delivery as an opportunity to introduce fully electric transportation means, things like drones, like robots, like autonomous driving. Now, the threats in terms of transportation, it's the lack of confidence in public transport, again, because it has indoor breathable environment. Of course, loss of jobs, it's a reality in ride-hailing, for example, taxi services. The lower revenue on public transportation, this could be a way to burden our public bills, and of course we taxpayers don't want this. Increased e-commerce could be a threat if we, after the lockdowns, start doing the same business as usual in terms of private car, etc. Then the boost on online purchasing could even degrade more congestion levels and air quality, outdoor breathable environment air quality. So the Sustainable Development Goals, that are 17, we must boost this, and through this reinventing opportunity. And so this is the final picture, how the post-COVID could be if telework continues, if people change to commuting in soft modes or active modes, or in autonomous electric cars. Also, in terms of last mile delivery, these three options here, robots, drones, autonomous delivery, could also be in the equation to achieve these sustainable goals by 2030. Thank you. You can find my contacts here. If you have any doubt, you can contact me. And just to finalize, this kind of lectures about sustainable mobility I give at the Faculty of Sciences at the master level, our Energy and Environment Master, and also at our Sustainable Energy Systems PhD program. Thank you.